Now, one of the interesting things that we get to do with the ship shape trips is we get to visit the last of things, the last survivors. And this was a beautiful opportunity for us. We visited HMAS Diamantina. And I have to admit, I did something a bit naughty. I would have loved to have done this with the Bathurst class survivor. I'd have loved to have done this with her, but I didn't manage to do it. I didn't manage to do it with HMAS Castlemaine because I couldn't walk around her. And it's rather the same with Haida and with Sackville. I couldn't walk all around them. But I could walk around Diamantina. I could do a full, what I call a counting the rivets and checking the plating tour. And so I'm going to tell you honestly, if you are not interested in someone narrating a video while walking around videoing, the narration's applied later, but walking around videoing the outside of the hull, trying to get different photos of the propeller shafts, the bow, and trying to get the entire hull, and then having some overview video as well, putting up people flights over, the first 15 minutes of this video is not for you. Move on to the next the sections where I'll be discussing the engines and be going into detail about the operations and those things, etc., as we go on. But I've always wanted to do this because I've always wanted to do a video where I get to talk about the construction work that goes into these vessels. And you have to remember, these vessels, they are more than just we've built a ship. They're how you've built a ship, what you've chosen to build a ship. Methodologies. By the very act of choosing riveting over welding, you have got far more yards which can do that, which can facilitate that, so you go with the riveted construction. There are far more facilities in the shaping of the hull, and all these other things will build into making a vessel which can be built to merchant standards, which can be built in merchant yards. And that is what we're talking about with this construction. So this is why I want to do this sort of video, because I want to talk this through, but I do realise it's something which I've wanted to do, but I'm not sure if everyone else is going to want to have it. And it was also an opportunity which I have to say thank you to the museum, thank you to the lovely people in Brisbane who allowed us to do this, because without them it wouldn't have been possible, because they had to give us permission, they had to let us sit down in the dry dock, they had to let us walk around, and they had to live with the fear that they had to, they had me, Dr. Dan, walking around in the bottom of the dry dock, filming this, setting this up, and you'll see some of the funny facial expressions I'm putting in the video, because I have literally left it as it was recorded. I did think, should I edit this to make myself look sort of more dashing and, get out the bits where I'm frowning at the camera, trying to get the settings to work and all these things? No, because I'm giving you the full experience of what it was like for me, and that's what I'll be talking through with you. So I hope you enjoy it, and, well, that's next. Now, as you can see, this is us walking along the hull, and please do look at those rivet lines. Look at the panels in the metal of the hull. Look at how the plates have been woven together, and of course, look at the supporting keels. There are stabilizers and systems down there to give these frigates the best performance they could give them. And it's really nice. You see, you've got Dan there at the back who's serving as my scale for you. He's roughly 5'10", nearly 6 foot once he's in his shoes and his hat on, because his hat never seems to rest directly on his head. So he's about 6 foot, like me and Drac are about 6 foot, and he gives a really nice sense of scale as we're looking at this, as you're going along, because this ship is all about scale. It's much bigger. It's much, much bigger than the earlier corvettes. But when you start looking up that hull and look up its side, you can see that is a mercantile hull. That shaping, whilst it's got some structure towards the bow, etc., and it's done for efficiency, that is a mercantile hull. It is not flared, it's not V-shaped, as you would find in a destroyer or even a sloop. It is built to a standard which merchant builders, which marine engineers who built merchant ships could understand, would readily have a details of, and would readily understand, readily be able to get the grips with, and could explain. And this dry dock really does serve to give it really nice scale. It truly does. it's a nice thing having a dry dock like this, because the scale there allows us to really look through the realities of the situation, the realities of the vessel. You can see the gangway from above. Now, if you look at this bow section, you'll notice how the bow is shaped for stability more than speed. Now, you can tell that due to the flaring and due to the fact that the hull shape is all around stability more than speed. It's not going out to a sort of narrow profile. It's not keeping narrow profile quite low in the hull. It's allowing the hull to rest. In some regards, it even could be argued to be flat-bottomed. It's a really nice shaping for what they were supposed to do, and Diamantina is a great example of what they were supposed to do. And again, as you go this side, you can still see, again, the way the plating maneuvers, the way the plating is shaped. And at this point, you might have noticed my hand was pointing to something. It's the Aztec dome. Yes, there's an Aztec dome down there, and you can see it quite clearly. But quite sort of a nice structure to look at and a nice structure to shape. And at some point, again, Dan is going to move, hopefully, down towards the Aztec dome, and that will give you some sense of scale for that dome. If you can't see it, it's between the two concrete pillars, slightly off to one side. A little bit along. There you go. Dan's passing along. He's not far from it now. You can sort of see it. And he gives you, again, a nice sense of scale, because he's roughly 6 foot. Look at how deep that hull is. Look at how much that ship is. And again, we're talking about a vessel. A vessel which is 1,500 tons in standard displacement. 2,200 tons roughly in full load. There's a debate as to, exactly how they are. Even from above, they are an elegant looking ship. You can see the lines, you can see where they position things, like the 4-inch gun, how it's raised up, how it's positioned, in order to provide the best firing stability and firing arc. These were good vessels. These were vessels designed around the realities of the conflict they were going to face and what they were going to deal with. And having the weapons forward like they did gave them the opportunity to use those weapons, to make the most of those weapons in combat. Having guns fore and aft, arraigned as well, was useful for them. It gave them the coverage they needed. Having air defenses. These are general purpose weapons. These are what you fit on escorts. And the thing about frigates is they're designed to not just be escorts in the peaceful theatres, like the Flower class and the Bathurst class. When I say peaceful theatres, I mean theatres where they can be focused around a one-dimensional threat. They're going to mainly be facing submarines and occasional air attack. Okay, so we can arm them quite heavy for dealing with submarines, and we can have them dealing with a bit of an air attack as well capability. Frigates were supposed to go into, be able to provide escort services into more aggressively contested theatres. And so they have slightly more firepower. They have slightly more capability. They still don't get torpedoes. They still don't get anything heavy, which is going to allow them to actually go toe-to-toe with a cruiser or a destroyer. But they have the weapon systems they need to assist them in the operations they're going to do. And again, we walk along here and see the Aztec Dome again. But can't just carry on walking along here and seeing what there is on this class, what there is to see. I love this space walking through here, because you really did get an illustration of the hull plating, of the shaping of the hull. As I said, it's almost a flat-bottomed hull in some ways. And you can also see the various holes you need in the hull in order for the ship to be able to do what it has to do to survive, to operate. Walking along here, by the way, the poor person from the museum who was with me was spending half the time worrying I was going to bash my head. I mean, the man was one of the most kindest people I've ever worked with, and was so concerned about me hurting myself. And I was going, don't worry, I'll be okay. I've done this. I've done similar things before on ships in dry dock. But still, I have to say, big props to the gentleman for allowing me to do this. And then, well, because of the gating, we had to sort of divide things off. But this then gives you another profile of the side of that hull and how straight it is, how vertical it is. Again, you can see what this vessel is shaped for. This vessel is shaped for anti-submarine warfare operations. This vessel is shaped to be able to be built as easily and as quickly and as strongly as possible, because you can tell the strength built into this vessel because it survived the time it has. You can tell the quality of engineering that went into this vessel because it survived the time it has. Look at those rivets. Look at the lines of the metal sheeting, the plating. Look at it. And I was so impressed by the shaft design. I really was. It's simple, it's elegant, it's robust. It's everything you want in a wartime escort. And I was really, really intrigued by it. And yes, there are sections missing there. But that actually allows you to see even more of the shaft design, to see even more of the shaping. It was a really wonderful experience to be able to wander along and be able to see all these bits and see, again, how much of the hull is still resting on its keel. Still resting perfectly on its keel. I do have to say, though, it did make it intriguing to me because this vessel, Diamantina, was actually floated out at one point when there were issues with the dry dock. With the way the dry dock's now been installed, I don't think that's an option for her. I don't think that's an option for her again in the future. Once you put in permanent positions, permanent concrete posts like they have for her, that makes it very, very difficult for them to be able to move her in the future. But there again, that's not necessarily a bad thing because they can look after her in the dry dock. They can take care of her, and she's got the structural integrity to do so. This was one of the very nice men who was very worried about me. You can see he's looking at me with a slightly worried expression because he really didn't want me to go diving underneath that hull again. He was so kind and so caring. They were such a lovely team. They were literally going, "You're nuts. You're going to break yourself." And, like, I wasn't the one who actually got hurt on they didn't manage to hurt themselves this day. On this day, it was actually Drac who managed to hurt himself. But did my jolly best, definitely in certain areas. Now, in this one, I've decided to change the camera angle around. Why am I doing that? I can't remember. Oh yes, because I'm trying to get decent photos of the propellers. I want to get decent photos of the screws and have a look at them. As you can see, wearing my HMAS Diamantina hat the whole way through. That's something we do as a ship shape crew. Whenever we turn up, we do make sure we're wearing hats of the facility we're at. We make sure we're advertising them because it's all thanks to them we're allowed to do this. If it wasn't for their kindness, if it wasn't for their support, we wouldn't get to do these things. It's entirely thanks to museums and how kind of helpful they are. And we do everything we do, we have their permission. We are very careful to ask their permission, and the fact they're prepared to let us do this despite being worried, and you can see the full shaft assembly, you can see the full coverings for its fairings there. And now we're getting onto the propellers. Now these really did, the blades and the shaping of the blades really did interest me because when I was looking at the rest of the hull and all the arrangement, I was looking at a pretty mercantile construction. I.e., it was a merchant build, not a naval build. And the whole point about the frigates is they are part naval build, part merchant build. They're sort of naval construction built to almost merchant standards, but merchant plus standards. The interesting thing that really interested me, though, was the shaping of the blades on the screws, the propellers. That shaping, that's not mercantile. That's not merchant-style shaping.
not for the vessel you're dealing with of a frigate size. That's the shaping that if I was seeing it on a merchant ship, I would expect to be seeing it on a far faster vessel than an average merchant vessel. I'd be expecting to see it on something like a liner or even a large, fast post ship or something like that. Not the shaping of a merchant vessel that size. And there's the lighthouse ship behind me. Now, I was doing this because I'm trying to get a better picture of the propellers. And so I put the camera down, as you can see, very serious face as I'm trying to think it through and making sure it works. And you're going to see me do a little jump for joy in a bit, I swear. I think I remember doing that. And yeah, you can see the shaping of the stern, but yeah, look at those blades. Look at the way the screws are shaped, are formed. And you've got a nice little alligator for scale, I think. Or is that a crocodile? I can't remember. It was one or the other. I'm still not good at telling the difference between two. And yeah, when you've got these two blades, the way they're shaped, the way they're formed, those are very efficient for both low speed maneuvering, but also for high speed dashing if you're going in a straight line, the way they're shaped. And it's a really interesting blades to have there. Really interesting shaping it was. Really quite proud to be able to get that picture in. Anyway, she's a very good looking hull. She really is.
It always amazes me how much this class, and I probably am now saying this for an nth time, really are worth it. They're basically the Royal Navy going, okay, we've got the flowers, which are... We've got this criteria from operating sloops. This is the bare minimum. Boom. Now there's a case of what I'd really like is a Black Swan class, because those are our ASW hunting killers extraordinaire. But we'd like to be able to produce it more quickly. So we're prepared to accept a sort of 70%, 80% Black Swan. And you have some ideas go through the naval constructors. They do go through the naval constructors. It's also it's one of those things which, again, the amount of times I read, it was all thanks to Smith's Stock Company or this, and you're sitting there, no, the naval constructors are quite heavily involved. We should not be demeaning William Reed at all, but thinking that the Royal Navy's naval constructors are going to ignore anything of naval construction, that Stanley Goodall, etc., is not going to get involved, is very, very, I wouldn't say naive, but misguided. Especially after the experience, of course, the Hunt class escort destroyers, where a relatively junior team involved had made a error of scaling, which weren't noticed and went all the way up and were signed off at all the levels, and it wasn't noticed until they were being built. Were in the final levels of construction. I went, oh frigate, we scaled the wrong way. After that experience, they're all kind of focusing in. But yes, the River class. Well, the argument, to be honest, as to whether or not they're worth it or not, could be seen in this. They were planned to build 30 to test it out. They built 151. And only 2 vessels were cancelled rather than completed. Now, I have to correct something I probably said, but I want to explain it at this point. I keep referring to Diamantina as the last survivor. Well, she's the last survivor in full River-class frigate form. HMCS Stormont of the Royal Canadian Navy became Aristotle Onassis' super yacht, Christina O, which is now apparently still in service and still owned by people. HMCS Honeywell, well, she is used as a training ship still, I think, by the Sri Lankan Navy, but there's a debate over this. There is a real debate over this. She's technically SNLS Gajabu, and there's a whole discussion as to how often she goes to sea, or how often she gets used, and what she gets used for. But she's definitely not in her original form. She's definitely not looking like she did. And there is HMS Fowl, which became UBS Mayo, which was preserved by the Burmese Navy. officially, and is officially a museum vessel. And again, I can't find out much details of their fate and how she is at this time. I've been trying to look into it, and I've been trying to do more. But the pictures I have found don't suggest to me that she's in her original historic form. So yeah, HMAS Diamantina is the last survivor in that form, and that makes her very, very special to me. That really does. And, well, yeah. If you order 30 and end up getting 151, yeah, I'd say they were worth it, because they obviously felt they were worth it at the time. And the thing is, their realization that the Royal Navy really does need to replicate the Black Swans. That the corvettes, the Flower class, the Castle class, they are certainly a step up from trawlers. The Hunt class are good, but they do require a full naval hull, and due to the stigma of especially the early issues with the earlier batches due to that scaling error, basically in ship design, scaling up tends to go okay. Just trying to scale down tends to cause problems due to complications, is how I'll explain it. I'm going to do a full video about it someday. I plan to do one while I was scheduled for when I was ill this year. It didn't come through. And so it will be scheduled in, and it will be explained. Probably a key ships on them. And, well, they were good vessels. They're good vessels, but they also can't be built in the civilian yards. And these could. And these could be built in Canada, Australia. And that's the thing. This is the Australians have built up their yards with the Bathurst class, and now they can build these. And they are good vessels. They're good, solid vessels. I'm going to talk more about the Australian indigenous production and the yards and how they're built and how they're used. But first of all, shameless book plug time. Now, I put a shameless book plug in every single video because I want to say thank you to you all for supporting the channel and making it possible for me to be a public-facing historian, to be doing naval history like this and being able to share it all with you in this way. But also to promote my books, because as an academic, we are promoted based on how well our books do, so that's always the joy. But I do point out this was finished off during COVID, and I've only been able to do the visits to Canada and Australia since COVID. So it doesn't, in the current versions, it doesn't have much about the Canadians or the Australian Navy other than those which I could find in the UK archives, because I didn't want to write whole sections of my book based on other people's work. It's not plagiarism if you reference and put it in your own words. But it feels mighty close to it for my style. I like to go and do my own research. Now, I can understand if I was writing a book like Nicholas Rogers' The Price of Victory, this huge tome, covering the breadth and length it does. Now, yes, there is a lot of personal scholarship in this by Nicholas Rogers, but there's also, because of its sheer size and scope and scale, by necessity, Roger has had to rely on a lot of other authors of works. There is nothing wrong with that when you're doing this. It does open you up to making errors if the original authors have made errors, or if you have an error of interpretation. But there again, there's always the option of them making errors, even if you're doing the work straight off the archive material. We're all human. But yeah, I didn't want to do that for this book. Maybe if I get enough sold and I get another edition, the third edition will include some extra chapters. 2. One to focus in on the Canadians and one to focus in on the Australians, probably. Because, honestly, their wartime service, especially in the European theatre, I have covered fairly well, because the British kept quite extensive archives on what they were doing. But it'd be interesting to discuss more about their post-war service. Speaking of videos we got coming up, this comes out on the 16th of December, if everything goes to plan. It's being finished off and polished off on the 16th of December, including this bit's being recorded on the 16th of December. You're going to know what stuff has been re-recorded on the 16th of December because I'll be wearing this shirt. But yeah, tomorrow's Two Historians with the wonderful Harry Bennett, and that's going to be really cool. And then we've got quite a packed little week going on. It's going to be an interesting week. I'm looking forward to it. I've got 2 episodes of Two Historians next week, hopefully. It's going to be good. It's going to be very, very good. Crossing fingers. Crossing fingers. Anyway, thank you very much, and let's get on with the video. Now, the important thing was that they had to be like the Black Swans. But they got vertical triple expansion engines. Black Swans had turbines. They had 5,500 indicated horsepower. The Black Swans had 4,300 horsepower to achieve 20 knots, officially. Both sides, so both ships. It's an official top speed of 20 knots. And yes, there is a fair degree of hull shaping at work there. That does tell you something, that I need 5,500 indicated horsepower to get 20 knots on a River class hull. But on a Black Swans class hull, I need 4,300 shaft horsepower. Now, IHP versus SHP, there is a difference. They're not usually a one-to-one, direct one-to-one conversion. It's going to depend on the efficiency of the system. But I highly doubt the efficiency of the River class was such that they were dropping 1,200 horsepower. I know there is at least one colleague who tried to tell me they did, but when I pointed out that would make them the least efficient engines designed since HMS Warrior, they kind of looked at me funny and walked away. I'm sorry. Yeah, indicated horsepower versus shaft horsepower all depends where you're measuring horsepower from. Whether you're measuring the horsepower on the shaft or whether you're measuring the horsepower in terms of the theoretical generation of the engines. It's with direct drive especially, the amount lost is not going to be anywhere near that great a percentage. It just isn't. But yes, these were built in Australia. These are the Australian ones. There are ones built in the UK, there are ones built in Canada, some of the ones built in Canada serve for the US Navy. And wherever they are built, they use the locally produced facilities. There is a reason why the Australian ones, and to an extent quite a lot of the other ones, but not necessarily a guarantee, had Admiralty free drum boilers, because that's what they built, like they had in their Bathurst class. There's the marine boilers, Scotch boilers, which were in the Flower class corvettes. They have triple expansion engines, and as you can see, this is the vertical triple expansion engine. And as you can see, it is not a triple expansion engine. It is a technically 3-stage but 4-chamber engine. So it gets into a whole naming culture, which I don't feel like getting into in today's video, because I just want to point out this is an incredibly efficient design. Again, another reason why I'm really sure they don't drop that much horsepower to get to their 20 knots. And yes, there is, as I said, hull shaping in it. The hull shaping, as I've already shown, on the rivers is very much a sort of... Whereas the Black Swans is more of a... So it's more of a sort of the hull shaping and how that affects the way the vessel cuts through the water, and how it allows it to rise up and reduce the amount, because if if it's going at speed, what you can do is you get a slight rise up in its moving, maneuvering, and a rise up in its sort of altitude in the water. And if you've got a certain hull shape, that can actually reduce your friction, because it can reduce the area which is in contact with the water. Got a hull shape like a river class, it doesn't matter much. It's not going to reduce your friction that much. And that's how you can get certain efficiencies at certain speeds with certain hull designs. Again, it's a fun piece of engineering to get into. But everything that you see comes from Australia. Everything here is made in Australia. And that's important. That's important when we're considering these vessels. That's important when we are talking about them and going, well, what were they up to? What do they really do? What do they really provide? They provide the capability. They are the boost over what had been previously viable with the Flyer class and the Bathurst class. And now you've got this. She's built by Walkers Limited in Marlborough. She's laid down April 1943, launched April 1944, commissioned April 1945. And decommissioned for the first time in August 1946. Not to be recommissioned until June 1959, so she does 13 years in reserve. Her motto, whoever leads protects. And I can't think of a more apt motto. A leader is also supposed to be the protector of their people. Whoever leads protects. It's a good phrase to go with her. And we're going to do another thing in that, because I'm going to be able to walk you around the engines again. So that's going to start happening in pretty much now. One of the really intriguing things is when you're walking around and you're looking at sort of British-style equipment and British-style industrial heritage and design considerations, but you're seeing Sydney, Melbourne, Castlemaine, all these different names on the production underneath, and the writing, rather than the Sheffield or Newcastle. Although you do actually see sometimes Newcastle as well, but yeah, it's a very different Newcastle. It is a very, very different Newcastle. This was all domestically produced. This is Australian through and through. And these engines are about as efficient and well made as you could get anywhere in the world. It really is a testimony to the quality of Australia's industrial capabilities at a time that they're able to produce all these. They are some really fine work, some really precise work. There are lots of very interesting systems put in here, and they all come from Australia. They're all produced domestically. I would say one of the interesting things I found looking around this engine, and if you manage to go visit Diamantina, you'll see this, is that unlike with the Bathurst class, where it's very much the existing supply lines in existing industrial heritage of each yard, by the time it gets to the River class, they're able to mix and match stuff from different yards and different supply lines to supply different yards. They're able to more work as one country rather than working as the individual yards. And they're able to work as one industrial base. And this is really shown in the River class, and it really does produce some great quality. Now, from one heart of the ship, its engine, its power, and its boilers, to the other heart of the ship. Yes, what was it like living aboard the ship? And for this, I've tried something again. It's a video walking through the ship. Literally, I'm just holding the camera as I'm walking through, and I'm going to discuss these things as we're doing it. So please do tell me if you've liked this sort of style of presentation, if you do like this style, and if it's worked for you. If it hasn't, I won't ever do it again, probably. But if you, well, HMAS Vampire will have some bits like it in. But if you do like it, then in future I'll try and do it when I'm on other ships. So I'm going to start off by apologising to say this lasts about roughly 5 minutes, and there are points at which it gets a bit swirly. Now, that map is interesting to me, and it always is when they appear on ships, because I know the history of maps appearing on ships. And maps and diagrams like that, in that you had a couple on ships in World War I era, but realistically, it mostly comes in as a major thing where you find them on various different levels, various different positions around a ship in World War II. When you're dealing with crews who are coming in who are wartime service only, or maybe, those sort of things, a mass mobilization of people who were not mariners, who were not merchant marine, not naval, and they need to find their ways around the ships. Now, this ship might be small, but it's densely packed. There's lots of subdivision. There's lots of
duplication and in where where they need to. There's things broken up to try and make them survivable as possible. Breakers and radio facilities and all those things. This was sort of the area we're going around now. Is when a lot of the electrics is dealt with on the ship. And the thing is, you have these people coming into a ship who don't have experience of a ship. They need to be able to navigate their way around while they're learning it. And so that's what they do. They have these maps up there, so people don't have to keep asking for directions. They can work their way out, work their routing. But yeah, this is a good facility. Apologies that it's a little bit jittery in places. As I said, I'm still learning. I'm still very much learning how to use the camera. Oh, that just flashed there. That was the very nice gent who was showing me around the engine room. If you see him aboard Diamantina, tell him he's a superstar and listen to all his stories. They are absolutely great. I cannot, because this channel is family friendly, especially little cousin friendly for me, actually have some of them on here, because whilst they are perfectly normal linguistics for Australians, and I have Australian relatives and realise it is definitely not, it's definitely still family friendly for Australia. It's not family friendly for the UK. Oh, I do love it. The more we travel around, sorry about the swirly bit there, I went a bit too fast on the motion system. There you go. They've got navigation systems and various other things in this space. One of the things you realize as you travel around America, around Canada, around Australia, as well as the UK, is that whilst we all technically speak English, we all have a very different approach to English. I have to say, in my experience, the ones who are actually strictest on it linguistically, i.e. strictest about swear words and those things, are probably the Americans so far from what I've seen and what I've heard when I've met them. Conversely, honestly, hanging around with the Australians is like hanging around with the Royal Marines. For them, swearing is punctuation. It's fine. It's perfectly normal. And it's just, there's no malice behind it, and so it doesn't really bother anyone. But it is quite funny when you get in the first sort of couple of days of being there, experiencing it, going, oh, good lord. Now, as you can see, you've got the two generations of bedding. You've got the later on editions of bedding, which is metal racking bedding, which comes down, but you also have the early editions of hammocks. Honestly, myself, I'd have preferred the hammocks, because I'm fairly certain these vessels would have absolutely rocked on the way. Absolutely rocked. And frankly, I think I'd have preferred a hammock, because it's probably going to give you a more, once you're used to it, it's going to give you a more stable sleeping space and a more comfortable sleeping space. But yeah, it was a really, really cool time, and a lot of fun was had there. More forward accommodation spaces. You start to realise just how densely the crew were packed when you start thinking about those hammocks and all those things in there. Also, you start to realise the faith the lovely docents and a team place in you when you sort of, I'm doing this, I'm wandering around, taking photographs, everything, trying to do a sort of a trip, through a vessel for people who can't get there, and show people what they're sort of seeing and what you can see and why you should go and visit it. Because trust me, visiting it is so much better. This video is great. I actually enjoy going through this video because it's reminding me of all the stuff of visiting there. But I can tell you now, as good as the video is, actually seeing it in person, oh, that's so much better. That's fantastic. And that is really, really cool thing. But yeah, the more you see of these spaces, the more you think about the accommodations, how many people were stayed in these places.
24 in that last room alone. It's just so dense when you think about the people in there. And in this one space, there'll be another 36. It's just, it's cozy. It is cozy. If anyone snores, there's going to be a lot of things aimed at them. But probably going to be tired enough you're going to sleep through it. The kitchen facilities are also pretty darn good. This is one of the things I noticed after having gone around Sackville. The kitchen facilities on there were a far, far narrower space. On Diamantina, it's an actual proper galley space. I'd say Castlemaine also had better kitchen facilities, better galley spaces than Sackville really did. It's not bad. Honestly, for the ships at the time, it's perfectly adequate. But honestly, you've got far more space to spread out. On Diamantina, the galley size is actually probably actually was slightly bigger than that which is on the USS Sullivan's, or about the same size as I think was on the Haida after its modifications. So yeah, they are quite substantial, quite a substantial space, and it shows the importance of food. Living on these ships was not going to be easy. It was going to be tight. It was going to be constant effort, constant work. But yeah, the spaces, everything is done for efficiency. Everything is to be organized to be as easily and as efficiently managed so you can get the maximum out of the crew aboard. These frigates were good ships. And there's a reason why pretty much everyone is operating them, and nations are even nations who weren't operating them during World War II were operating them post World War II. There were lots of ships going around cheap at the end of World War II. After World War II was over, you had your pick of the litter. The fact that so many nations picked these frigates to pick up shows how good they were. And Diamantina is a beautiful example of them. Really is. As is fairly obvious on such a vessel, which is going to have such a mixed crew, but also such a wide variety of taskings, and is supposed to go into considerably more risky theatres than the Castlemaine and the Bathurst class were technically supposed to, although they often found themselves in pretty hairy theatres as well. Command and control becomes a rather important thing, because you're going to have a small kernel of experienced personnel that, at least initially, in initial operations, you are wrapping a whole load of wartime service, maybe some reservists around. You get probably the wartime experienced personnel, are reservists themselves, and you need to make the most of them. Now, this means you need communications, you need sensors, you need all the systems you can get, and you need a straightforward command and control arrangement, both physically in terms of their organization, but also in terms of their operation, so that you can make the best use of them. You don't want to have a scenario where, where's the radar space? You know, where are we getting the space for the sonar? Where's that information ASDIC display? Where's that going to be? And you know, from here we can't see X, Y, or Z. You need it all together. You need it all as close as possible. So the wheelhouse, of course, directly below the bridge. You have this space, the ASDIC space, sonar space, forward of the bridge in sort of cubbyhole space. You know, you've got the bridge space, and then you've got them sort of sitting a bit forward. You've got radar. You've got the communications. The radio room is hop, skip, and a jump maximum from the bridge. I mean, the jump's probably unnecessary, but you know, I like a little jump. We all do. And of course, you have the open top bridge. Now, this is also an interesting thing, because there are a number of people who claim, you know, it's not necessarily a sensible idea. In World War II, when a goodly portion of your fire control system is based on the brain power in here and these to compute and aim and see what's going on, and when ships are quite literally dodging sticks of bombs being dropped by aircraft by going, they're dropping port starboard to avoid them. Yeah, having an open top bridge, it's gonna be baking in a hot summer day, it's gonna be wet and miserable on a stormy day, but it's still better than having it covered. It makes sense. It's not going to be always the best experience, but it's something you have in a period when you are not able to rely on sensors, and you're at engagement ranges where visual engagement, visual identification, visual working for reactions to enemy actions are still a viable metric. And actually, one of the interesting things I see today is quite a lot of the systems we're talking about implementing on ships, especially for counter-drone warfare, are basically trying to replicate the 360-degree view you used to get by just not having a roof on the bridge. They're talking about all sorts of different systems and automatic AI scanning, all these things, because we're having to replicate this without having the crew, and with crew which really aren't used to the idea of having an open top bridge, and also, most importantly, a whole lot of systems which would not be good for an open top bridge that we are now used to in operations. So yeah, it's the more things change, the more things stay the same. But the frigates, they're a good design. They really are. And they have all the space you need for these things. And by having especially the gunners forward, not far away from the bridge, you can, as a senior officer, shout directly at them if that's necessary. If that's necessary. Which does lead us to the weaponry. And yeah, again, you have a good mix of what I would call general purpose weaponry, of air warfare, anti-air weaponry, and ASW weaponry. Because that was their mission. They were escorts. They weren't supposed to be going really and fighting other big ships, or even ships the same size. They had enough weaponry that they could probably take out a torpedo boat or a submarine on the surface, without any worry. If a submarine's below the surface, they have weapons to engage that too. And if they have aircraft coming in, they have lots of weapons to try and form part of the screen protecting against that. But that's what they're focused on. That's what their focus is. It's about providing themselves with protection, but also protecting their convoys. It's not about going, oh, you know what, there's an enemy fleet over there, let's go and engage that. That's not their role. In the case of Diamantina, her weapons were 2 4-inch guns, quick-firing ones, in single mounts, 8 20mm Auricons in single mounts, 3 later on 3 40mm Bofors in single mounts, and then 4 Auricons in two twin mounts. But, you know, they play around with things as they go on. As time goes on, as the defences get better, and as options get available, they take them. And I would honestly say I take, as I've said before, I take the armaments listing, especially the light AA mounts listing for ships during World War II, with a very large pinch of salt, which is a UK expression for basically meaning I have very little faith in this. There is a possibility it's true, but there's also a possibility that they find some, say they found some Japanese AA guns which had something on, or they just happened to find some heavy machine guns, or they just happened to find another Bofors, or they happened to find a pom-pom, or they happened to find this or that, and, well, you know, we've got space on deck for it, we can carry it. As long as you've got ammunition for it, use it. Carried a Headshock 24, anti-submarine AS mortar, basically, and 50 depth charges with various launching systems for it. So they're a good fit. Again, it's for defending a convoy, against submarine attack, against air attack, and maybe against enemy light forces attack, i.e. torpedo boats. There are some interesting discussions about frigates and some of the operations they get involved in, especially around the UK waters. I don't think there's a scenario where they ended up confronting destroyers or even large torpedo boats in the Pacific. From memory, though. That is, from memory. I could be wrong, and there are enough of them going around, there is always a chance. But I think the only examples I've heard and seen written down in books have been ones talking about basically the Atlantic operations where that's happened. But yeah, they did occasionally collectively go, no, that those larger vessels are not getting here. We're all going to fire our 4-inch guns in their direction. We're going to look like destroyers. We're going to form up and look like destroyers. And the thing is, at a certain point, they do look like Hunt-class escort destroyers. They do look like slightly larger vessels. They can pull it off to an extent if they start acting in that way. It's the old bluff. And Royal Navy crews, and US crews. And when I say Royal Navy, by the way, I'm using that as shorthand for, and I've said this before, I'll say this again, for the fact the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, the Royal New Zealand Navy, the Royal Indian Navy, and of course the British Royal Navy, they are so interoperable. They work together so often on so many things. They operate in such a similar headspace, especially in the 20s and 30s. But as World War II approaches, I often use Royal Navy just to cover all of them, because on a lot of operations, they might as well be one Navy. They integrate so seamlessly, they operate with each other so seamlessly, they might as well be one Navy. But with all that said, I want to give you a bit of a view of the 4-inch gun, and this is the first bit of recording I've used here, which has been recorded by someone else. See if you can guess who the camera person was.
Okay, when you're ready. And now switch over and do the elevation. Other way.
As you can see, that's the high angle, low angle Mark 20 4-inch mount. Manually operated. You could hear, if I was talking over that, you would not be able to hear the cranking going on. You'd not be able to see, really sort of witness the difficulty in the wind that we had just there, just the wind down on the river. That's all you're dealing with, and look at what it was like to operate. So yeah, that was for both high angle and low angle, so it was supposed to engage moving targets on the surface, moving targets in the air. Now, I would say, when you're dealing with things at longer range, you don't have to move as far to cover the same distance. If you think about it, if something's over here, can I put it into screen? Yeah, see? And I move to there. Well, I've only got to move to that distance to do it. But if it's here, and I move up, that's quite a long way. So, just because it's manual operated doesn't mean it's necessarily bad or anything like that. It's going to require a lot of visual control. It's going to require a lot of humans in a loop. But these systems are also very reliable. They're also very easy to maintain. They're very easy to work, which means you are likely going to have a working system when you find yourself in trouble without much support to back it up, which is useful for vessels like this, which are going to be doing convoy after convoy after convoy, and you don't want them having to take off time to have masses of maintenance to keep their systems in tip-top condition, because honestly, their value is in the aggregate, not in the individual. Which leads us to the Australian constructors involved. And what interested me was the overlap, but also differential between these and the Bathurst class construction. Now, unsurprising, every single one of these yards that's involved in the production of frigates, or the River class, have been involved in the construction of Bathurst class. Cockatoo Docks and Engineering Company? Of course they were. Walkers Limited? Yes, they had been. Mort's Dock and Engineering Company? Certainly. They're the best shipbuilders that you never hear about from Australia. The State Dockyard in Newcastle. Yes, they built one of the Bathurst class, but they had built them. The Williamstown Dockyard. Oh yeah. Okay, Her Majesty's Australian Naval Dockyard. Yeah, the builders of the Castlemaine herself. They were there. Evans Deacon Company. Yes, they did. Interesting enough, BHP. BHP They might have built Castlemaine class, but they don't build River class frigates. And Pool and Steel, also not there. Again, built Bathurst class, didn't build River class frigates. So whilst some yards had moved on, proved they were capable, and they'd grown bigger, some don't. Some don't. Morse Dockett Engineering Company, of course, though, are the yard which produces so many crucial ships. But the interesting thing for me, especially, start considering the constructing things, is that Diamantina comes from Walkers Limited. Comes from the second one down in Maryborough. And Walkers Limited, well, that's an interesting yard. That's an interesting space. They still are, I think, railway producer of locomotives and rolling stock. I think they're part of a company called Downer Rail, but I don't want to be 100% sure on that. That I saw it noted in a book, and I've just gone, okay, that's there, but by now that book could be out of date. Let's be honest, companies like to change the name or get bought out or bought by others, and all sorts of things more often than I really want to care about. But yeah, they were a vessel and railway constructor, and they were a really crucial group. But saying that, they stopped building ships quite a while ago. In an interesting link to the earlier video on the Castlemaine, Walkers had been the yard which built HMAS Shoalhaven, the Bay-class frigate. They built 2 River-class frigates, Budakin and Diamantina. They built 7 Bathurst-class corvettes, Bowen, Cairns, Gladstone, Maryborough, Rockhampton, Tamworth and Toowoomba. They built some attack-class patrol boats. They built some Balakpan-class landing craft heavy, and they built some boom defense vessels, and some general purpose vessels. They'd actually started work as a shipyard in roughly 1884, building some hopper barges, which were being built for the Queensland Department of Harbour and Rivers. But, well, as they were being built, there were issues around the world, so these honestly, hopper barges, which were honestly always being built as hopper barges, were converted to serve as gunboats. Technically auxiliary gunboats, but they were also the largest warships built in Australia prior to Federation. So, yeah. Honestly, no one saw that one coming. No one saw that coming at all. In simple terms, this is an organisation which had a long history of building things when it was needed. And in wartime, the Royal Australian Navy needed ships. And they had a yard, and they were building ships. And they built good ones. You don't get the level of contracts they do if you're building bad ships. Even in a war when they are desperate, navies find another way to go and get them if you're producing bad ships. So let's consider the service of those ships and of the other ships of the class. Now, I'm going to give specific examples of their service, but honestly I want to start off by just talking about the various these ships I've got here. We have over here the USS Natchez, which was a River-class frigate, of course. Started life as HMS Annan when she's ordered, then becomes HMCS Annan, and is finally transferred to the US Navy before she's even launched, becoming the USS Natchez, and eventually in 1947 she's handed over to the Dominican Navy when she becomes the Juan Pablo Duarte, but is then eventually sort of further on in 1950 sold to a Puerto Rican engineer called Feliz Benitez as a private yacht. And she's not even the only private yacht in this picture. Then we have HMCS Waskisio, which was, how do I put this politely, definitely a Canadian vessel the whole way through. Very Canadian career, very Canadian service. She really does do a lot of the trips between North Russia to Great Britain and Canada around. She managed to pick up war honours of the Atlantic, the Arctic, and Normandy. She's built by Yarrows in Eskimo. At the top, well, of this one, we have HMAS Hawkesbury. Now, Hawkesbury is built by Mortstock and Engineering Company in Sydney. She has a motto of equality, not servitude, which is kind of a lovely motto to have in the role in a naval organisation, but, you know, let's talk about its value later. She picks up battle honours on the Pacific, New Guinea, Borneo, and she does really well. She serves really, really well. She's finally decommissioned in 1955. This is because she gets decommissioned post-war in 1947 after helping with repatriation of troops and movement of goods, and movement of things around afterwards. But then she gets reactivated in 1952 to support the atomic bomb tests in Montebello Islands. And she's there, and then when she returns in 1953, she's kept operation for a couple of years before she's finally deactivated, and then is sold off in 1961 for scrapping. So she's been around for a long time as a potentially useful asset. Then we have HMCS Stormont, or as more people probably know her as Christina O. Yes, this is the vessel which gets converted into Aristotle Onassis' yacht. And she has an experience of battle honours of the Arctic, the Atlantic, the English Channel, and Normandy. She picks up honours. She picks up service. And she's still around today as a yacht. One of the prettiest looking yachts you can find. And finally, we have HMS Teviot, which becomes HMSAS Teviot later in the war. Yes, she serves with the Royal South African Navy for a period. Basically, she serves for the South African Navy between 10th of June 1945 and January 1946. She does 6 months with them. Hey, look, honestly, they don't do much with it. They don't do much navally in World War II. But what they do have, they do put to good use. It just seems to be that navies are never really part of the South African defence plan, when you think, considering the size of the coastline and the importance of the trade routes going past them, it would be. But, yeah. That's just trying to explain the purposes of reserves to most modern governments. Now, in the case of Natchez and her career, well, she spends a lot of her time doing escorting various freighters and convoys, and at one point she's off hunting, along with other vessels, for the SS Libertad. She found 3 survivors. That's sometimes what you're doing as an escort. When a ship has been torpedoed, you hunt down what's happened to it. She does a lot of very good anti-submarine patrols, and she, along with some destroyer escorts, Kaufman, Boswick, and Thomas, use depth charges, hedgehogs, and all sorts of things to sink the U-879, a German submarine. In the case of Waskesiu, well, her service history, well, let me put it this way. U-257 was really not happy to find her. Really, really not happy to find her. As were a few other submarines. She turned into quite a leaf lasset, and she's kind of living proof that if you run convoys right, they're not just a defensive asset, they're an offensive asset, and they will start attriting your enemy. If you have enough escorts, enough vessels with them, they will start racking up. And she really did rack them up. In terms of Hawkesbury, along with doing the nuclear bomb tests, she spent most of her World War II service doing escort duties in New Guinea and the Philippine waters, and taking Australian troops to Tarakan and Borneo. She's non-stop working, which her battle honours do, I'll honestly stress. I've already talked about Stormont's battle honours, but also in her wartime service, it should be included that she towed a damaged HMCS Matar to Plymouth after Matane, sorry, I couldn't read my own handwriting there, Matane, was struck by a glider bomb. Matane, of course, being another River-class frigate that survived being struck by a glider bomb. Tough ships. Very tough little ships. And Teviot, well, she spends most of her war doing escort duties, but when she's actually assigned to the South African Navy, she was actually down for, I always want to say Operation Zipper. Is that is the correct operation name for the British planned landings in Malaya? But of course, those don't happen. So that's one of the reasons why the South Africans go, we don't need this. But that's always also an interesting thing to me. That part of the forces being arranged for the British retaking and relieving Malaya, removing the Japanese from there, do involve South African crewed frigates. This is the point which is often forgotten about the British Empire and the Dominions and the wider thing, is that's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of people for Britain to draw from. As long as they can keep them on side and working with them, they have a wide array of resources to call upon. Which leads us to the summary point for the class, really. And then, I have to admit, after the summary, there is going to be the question, but then there's going to be a couple more videos. I've got a video in there which shows a little bit of a snippet of the talks we gave at the museum while we were there, because this is one of the things we do when a ship shape goes and visits museums. If the museum would like us to, we will give talks. We'll happily give public talks, which are people are able to come and see. And also there is a little bit I've managed to salvage from some of the time in the engineering spaces with the lovely gentleman showing me around the engineering room, so I can give you an example of his storytelling style, which is little cousin safe, so not going to get me whacked around the head on the 25th of December. Okay, they're all coming in vast numbers. Please give this to me, okay? There are many of them. There's only one of me. I am outnumbered, and I will get the blame. I always get the blame. But I did want you to hear about it because he's such a spectacular guy and such a really cool understanding of history. So I wanted a little bit in there. So I've included those little bonus bits towards the end. Now, you might have noticed I have given a bit of history of the classes. I have talked about their construction. I've talked about some of their operations. I've talked about the design. But I haven't talked much about Diamantina's personal history in this video. And there's a reason for that. I want you to go visit her if you can. I want you to go look her up. I want you to go support the museum. I want you to go buy books like this, written by Peter Noonan. And the reason I wanted that is because, honestly, the museum in Brisbane is the last place where you can find a ship in this condition. And it's suffering. They are working so hard. The volunteers are doing so much. But when we were there, which now feels so weird to say, a couple of years ago, over a year ago, nearly 2 years ago, they were striving so hard. They're doing so much work, but they need support. They need assistance. They need people to go and help them out and go and visit them. And so I want to be very careful when I do these videos that I don't make it a case of, oh, we've seen a video, we don't need to go visit the ship. Very, very careful. And she's worth visiting. Trust me, you don't fill up this thickness of book with one ship service and not have something which is worthwhile visiting. And if I give you an example, the ship now had a public address system, and music often wafted through the mess decks, mainly pop. But the Skater's Waltz was also a frequent choice. A greater entertainment asset, however, was a copy of the Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall classic film, The Big Sleep. It was a pre-release version for the American forces, and the film had not yet been released in Australia. This meant Diamantina could obtain 2 other films from other ships, and shore bases for the loan of Bogey and Bacall. When no loans were possible, the crew enjoyed its treasure again and again, until some knew the dialogue almost by heart. The languid time ended abruptly on the 3rd of April with a 4:15 a.m. hasty slipping to race at full speed to rendezvous with the HMAS Quiberon. At 12:45 p.m, Diamantina's doctor transferred to the destroyer by Breach's boy. Marie Lloyd kept his word and steered a straight course to ensure his chess opponent did not receive an unscheduled ducking. Whilst the doctors conferred, Diamantina returned to Rabaul. With the decision taken to monitor developments and wait for a more stable operating room ashore, Diamantina's medical officer settled down on a destroyer as guest of the wardroom. The operation was successfully carried out at a US hospital a few days later. For the week after the return from the Quiberon Dash, the forecasts on quarterdeck were chipped and red-leaded. The task was not the most popular job for the crew, so Japanese prisoners carried it out. On the 12th of April, the ship put to sea again, this time first to Keving to embark Major Shand of Angno, and then to search for marooned airmen or sailors on the islands east and north of New Ireland. The motorboat was dropped off south of Covering to pick up the Major, and a rendezvous was arranged to the north. After an idyllic passage to the port, the boat set out in the afternoon with its passenger into increasing wind, rain, and seas. With everyone bailing, they at last glimpsed the ship through the squalls. The big bridge signal lamps were flashing in them, as the Morse illiterate boat crew fought to guide them home. It was only after they boarded and had been summoned by the captain's cabin to be greeted with rum and congratulations, the sailors found they had just traversed the minefield and the flashings had been a warning. A ship with a history like that is not going to be a boring vessel to go around. It really can't be a boring vessel to go around. We thought you were sending Morse to guide us in. Yeah, that was not Morse to guide you in. That was minefield you were going through. But you survived, so here, have some rum. It's all good now. And that, to me, sums up quite a lot of the story of the class. It's in many ways, I would love to see more of the class preserved, but in many ways, Diamantina is a very fitting example of the class to be preserved. Because of her history. Because the fact that she does do convoys, she does do the amphibious operations, she does all these little patrol operations, she does not just what the corvettes were supposed to do, but more. She goes into the higher threat areas, she does do the escorting, where she needs to, and this is what these ships were about. They're about providing the aggregate quantity. They're providing about the capability to be all the places you need to be in the strength you needed to be. They weren't about winning the battles, they were about waging the war. And that's something we've forgotten when it comes to ship design and construction. It really is. Now that being said, what's the question going to be? Well, I've already talked about corvettes, and what do you think that solution would be? But here's a question in terms of, if you're going to build a modern corvette, a modern solution like a Bathurst class or a Flower class corvette, what would you build? Something which is the bare bones essential. What do you think would be the vessel which is slightly better than bare bones? Because that's what the frigates were. They were, yes, we have these, but we now have the mass that we can afford to wait a little bit longer for something to get in, so we can make something a little bit better in almost every single way. What is that little bit better solution? What is that sort of halfway house between the full naval-built sloop, which is your ASW Predator extraordinaire, Black Swan class? There's a submarine nearby. Submarines all going, please, please, not be a Black Swan. Don't 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 be a Black Swan. Black Swan going, here it is. Yeah. But not also being the corvette, which is tossed around everywhere by the sea and doesn't give you much of the support to have enough of the strength, enough of the staying power to really do a long prosecution, although many of them still do that. And again, a classic example is the one which managed to apparently, in a single engagement, drop twice as many depth charges as they were officially supposed to carry. You do the maths on that one. I'm going for, they had a room of requirement aboard, and that room was stuffed full of depth charges. But sadly enough, I'm told Harry Potter might actually be fiction. It's terrible. But what would be that vessel which is just a little bit better? And that much said, and that much considered, well, the year of the aircraft carrier is over, so thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it interesting. What I'm going to do next, as said, is first up you're going to see a little video, a little short extract from our talks, I think Drax's going to put them all up on his channel at some point. Or if not already all up on his channel, I've just missed them while being ill. And then there's going to be a little excerpt from the engine room, where you can't really see us discussing, because we weren't discussing, but I was doing the classic thing of, I'm talking with this person who really knows a lot of information, and I want to get as much information out of them as possible, in a friendly way. so I'm listening to them, but I'm also not going to be pointing the camera directly at them, because usually the moment I point a camera directly at someone, they get very shy and bashful. So I am carefully going around the room, videoing and engineering and the engines and going through them. So one of the things that really I enjoy about that piece is that you'll probably see the dials come up quite a few times, because I was making sure I was getting good video image of the dials, because someday I do want to do a video about, probably I'm going to call it the Year of Constructors. Slightly different from the Year of Technology, because I'm literally going to go through the various shipyards around the world which build ships. It'll probably be boring as anything for most people, but I will really love doing it. I will really love doing it, so it'll be the Year of Constructors will come up at some point. I know it's not going to be popular on YouTube. I know it's not going to get me a lot of clicks, but a lot of people watching, but I think it'd be cool. I keep being told off by people. I should be doing more, as I do this history stuff, to try and get more people interested in naval history, and to try and share my love of naval history and encourage others to have a passion for it. I should approach it in a more popular, focused way. But sometimes I just love to do the stuff. Anyway, the 2 little videos. Hope you enjoyed them, and thank you very much for watching. Merry Christmas to all those who are celebrating that. Merry winter, whatever, to those who aren't. But these days, the spirit of Christmas feels pretty universal. If you're in a place which you're lucky enough to have the peace that you can enjoy it. Thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed what's coming next.
Yeah, exactly. It seems appropriate. It's just doing Irish production, right? So who wants to go first?
So between, say, 1918 to, say, mid-1930s, which was the least popular aircraft carrier?
Curious. By a very, very long margin. Stones was small, the purpose of it. Eagle was a pudgy conversion, but got on with life, had bells, and really reasonable combination. Argus was just a clothesline, flipped upside down, put to sea, but actually in the form of ocean line, actually relatively spacious combinations. Courageous and glorious for most of their time, most of that being into carriers. The problem with Furious was that as the first of the out of subclass of weird ships they tried to mitigate the effects of the advancement on air. And you see that like the Japanese carriers where they have that down facing funnel, better to connect to the sea. On Furious, their idea, much like the Ranger, was to truncate everything back, particularly stern, which in theory is a little bit better, at least with biplanes. It's not actually better for once you get to class of monoplanes. But with Furious, instead of trunking down the outside, which everybody else has got that idea, they trunked both sides, and trunking inside the hammer, which is why Furious has a lower aircraft capacity than Glorious and Rangers, even though they take the same part. Because a good chunk of the hang space is taken by those 2 funnel trunks, and also extremely hot gases, which meant that the hangar was another 24/7 when the boilers were going, because you basically had 2 massive space heaters inside of it, which was great for drying out aircraft, except they also found that when you're talking about aircraft with domed fabric and everything, when they took Furious down to the Mediterranean, some of the doming actually melted around the canvas, which is why you see it more Furious if you just higher the time you see the Atlantic where the heat is occasionally lower, but obviously then you're lowering the ship from the engine space is coming up. Normally that would escape up the ship, except now there's this almost falling hangar there that's just a hot box above you, so the trap between 2 heat sources, so you need the accommodations. Pretty toasty.
not only did any of the aircon systems stop working, the entire crew got an infection in the water supply and they got dysentery. So I'd say for that month, probably the least popular aircraft carrier to go in the Royal Navy was ours. Because no one had clean trousers at all for that month. But other than that, you're
When I first started here, there was very little documentation on the exhibits and displays. And for my own benefit, I went around and photographed every display site that I could find and put it together as a guidebook, again, as I said, for my personal gratification. And then over the years, other people have sort of spotted and said, "Oh, please, can I have a copy?" And it's almost now the official guidebook for the guides.
Well, that sounds sensible to me, and that sounds the best way to produce one.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if you need anyone to produce a guidebook, it's someone who's got questions.
Yeah. Yeah, we try and maintain it. I have a look at it every year and ask the other guys whether they've got any questions that they get asked that could be included in it.
It's one of those things that I find interesting in life, but it is a universal truth I've discovered, that if you have a guidebook which is written by someone who is approaching from a position of they have all the knowledge, it tends not be that helpful because they already have the knowledge, so they think other people will have the knowledge.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a guidebook written by someone who's starting from a position of having no knowledge, wanting to find out, it'll be absolutely exceptional because they'll have all the questions.
Exactly.
And they won't presume any knowledge on the part of the reader.
Yep.
Hope you enjoyed that. I also hope that the obscuration filter I put over the background video I was getting from the talks wasn't too heavy. That was literally, I set my camera up in the back of the room just to do extra sort of background shots while we were doing it, and I made sure it was going to sort of try and obscure faces a bit so that people weren't included in it if they didn't want to be. But we did film it all, and yeah. Really cool guy, a really cool guy I met down in the engine room. I often get sent the good ones, as I recorded in the video, but I didn't put that bit in there. One of the things that often happens when I'm going on these trips with Drac, and I never understand it quite when the ship show crew, but you're an academic historian can have one of three things. It can either cause people to go very quiet because they're worried I'm going to judge them, which is not my style at all. 2, they suddenly are full of questions for me, which means I can't really get questions in the other way around. And I spend my entire time talking, and this happens to Drac as well. So this one can also happen for Drac as well. It's very rare he gets the other option of the people thinking he's going to judge them. But yeah. And then the third one is they make sure whoever's sent with me is their geekiest, nerdiest guide down in the engine rooms, or wherever that's usually where I end up going and doing the filming. The internals of the engine rooms are down in deeper parts of the hull, and I prefer the last option because I can have the coolest conversations down in the depths of the hull. It's usually quite funny the amount of people who, when they come and find me, because they know the shipshape crew, how we sort of break up when we're filming these things. You'll find Drac usually on the top deck doing the filming out that air there, doing the drone stuff. You'll find Dan usually off interviewing people and doing specific part components. You'll find Garius off doing the same thing and talking with the local docents, making sure, how can we help them? How can we fit into your social media? How can we fit into the various things you need us to do? You'll find the other Dan off going through methodically through the displays, making sure we have everything catalogued and photographed, so we definitely have it all, which we might need it, and also they have a record of it all. And you'll find me, as I said, down in the engineering room. And usually I'm the hardest for people to find, but it's quite funny when people find me. It's usually a case of, "We have found you, Mr. Livingston," or rather, "We have found you, Alex." That is when I hear part quite a lot when I'm down in the depths. But yeah, it's a case of just poking. I'm crawling underneath a boiler, and someone spots my feet peeking out and goes, "We have found you, Alex!" And this is not a version of Where's Wally. I'm down here getting the photographs, man. But it is fun. It is fun. I do love that. That's part of things I really do love about the ship visits. I don't know. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.